Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's topic comes from the subreddit WomenInNews, posted by user MS Moley. The post is a link post that is titled, Afghan Women's Rights Draw Little Attention. The link is to a BangkokPost.com article, and it has an orange tag that says opinion on it. I am covering this to give Afghan's women's rights movement and their efforts more coverage. Moving over to the link itself, again, BangkokPost.com. The article is titled, Afghan Women's Rights Draw Little Attention. This was published on November 7th at 4 a.m. by John J. Metzler. If you want to listen to the article itself, I will be transcribing it shortly, or the website does have its own version that you can play. It's estimated to be about 4 minutes and 44 seconds long. I begin reading. Afghanistan's tragedy continues. Since the chaotic end of the Afghan war in August 2021, the country is now again ruled by the Islamic fundamentalist Taliban, which has literally turned the clock back on any hints of modernization and civil and human rights advancements. The rights of women, and especially girls, have plummeted into a medieval miasma. Fortunately, during a series of human rights hearings late last month, the UN General Assembly's Third Committee addressed the Afghan crisis. Special Rapporteur Richard Bennett details, quote, the Taliban's systemic gender oppression amounting to gender persecution and which is described as, quote, gender apartheid, end quote, by many Afghans. Quote, the new so-called law, quote, vice and virtue law, unquote, institutionalizes an, here we're skipping over an advertisement. Institutionalizes an expanding list of restrictions blatantly violating the rights of women and girls, end quote, and overall quote. The UN's Richard Bennett, a New Zealand national, served as chief of the Human Rights Section during the UN's longtime mission in Afghanistan. He warned, quote, it also impacts the entire society, including men, religious minorities, and journalists, as it infringes on their cultural rights, religious freedoms, and freedom of expression. Quote, women are literally silenced and are being seen as a threat against the Taliban's vision and strategy, end quote. The appalling and shameful pullout of American forces by the Biden/Harris administration squandered the blood and treasure that the U.S. and the world community invested in trying to improve Afghanistan's socio/economic status since 2001. Through 4 U.S. administrations, billions of dollars, and more than 2,400 American lives, not to mention over 20,000 wounded, the Afghan war ended with a shameful and catastrophic debacle. The pullout triggered jarring geopolitical repercussions which were soon felt from Ukraine to the Taiwan Straits. The aftershocks remain far from over. The enduring oppression continues. Mr. Bennett stresses, quote, the lack of a strong, united response from the international community has already emboldened the Taliban, ... They introduced a so-called, quote, morality, end quote, law, not only further restricting virtually every aspect of women's, lives, end parentheses. For over 3 years, girls and women have been barred from secondary education and beyond, end quote, and overall quote. Since the Taliban seized power, Afghanistan is now the only country in the world to ban girls and women over 12 years old from schools and universities, according to UNESCO. Moreover, according to a U.S. State Department country report on Afghanistan, Quote, the Taliban's edicts formalized discrimination and exclusion of women and girls from most aspects of society and at a nationwide level. Women did not have equal legal rights compared to men. End quote. The recently concluded General Assembly debate barely mentioned the case of Afghanistan, let alone the trauma facing its citizens. Though the international community faces a growing list of crises, the tragedy in Afghanistan dates from the late 1970s and the Soviet invasion of the country. Moscow's move led to the rise of Islamic militant groups such as the Taliban and equally put the country in a state of near permanent conflict for 45 years. Today, in the Freedom House Global Ratings of Civil and Political Rights, Taliban Afghanistan ranks 6 out of 100, namely one of the world's most repressive countries. Significantly, no country in the world formally recognizes the Taliban government. Equally, the Taliban does not hold the Afghanistan seat at the UN. Amid severe shortcomings in women's rights, Afghanistan's 45 million people still face staggering underdevelopment, food and medicine shortages, and lack of health care. UN humanitarian aid remains the only tenuous lifeline for a beleaguered land where about half the population needs food and health assistance. The UN's Bennett concluded, quote, we must send a clear message to the Taliban. There will be consequences for violations of human rights. We need to demonstrate to Afghans that the international community stands with them, not just in words, but through decisive actions, end quote. A key issue remains that the Taliban regime's isolation has been hostile to foreign aid donors and outreach. Taliban thus becomes a victim of its own hubris and self-serving arrogance. But sadly, it's the Afghan people, especially the women, who suffer under this dystopian regime. Here ends the article. Below we read, John J. Metzler is a United Nations correspondent covering diplomatic and defense issues. He is the author of, quote, Divided Dynamism, end quote, The Diplomacy of Separated Nations, Germany, Korea, China, end quote. End section. At this time, I'm not sure what to recommend as aid to Afghan, especially to the Afghani women who are suffering under this. I don't have any recommendations. All I can do is say keep an eye out for organizations purporting to give aid, purporting to help these women, and purporting to help with getting women's rights in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, I know of no smuggling ring that would be getting those women and girls out of Afghanistan. Like I said, keep your ears open, your eyes open, and at this point, all we can do is hope and put pressure on those who say that they're going to work to bring women's rights to the Afghanis in Afghanistan.